challenged within Beijing. As we look at bringing Americans home, I think you have highlighted specifically the intent by the Communist Party within China to use Americans as a pawn in a larger political game. So let me be clear from the get-go, Mr. Chairman, that any nation that holds Americans hostage to exert their political will against the United States is first and foremost responsible for those Americans' safety and their safe return to the United States. And second, that the full weight of the American people is looking on those countries to be responsible actors in making sure those hostages are brought home. We expect our citizens to be treated well, and we expect them to be released. As an Air Force officer for more than 2 decades serving on our nation's front line, I know that no mission is complete until every American makes their way back to U.S. soil. It is completely unacceptable, even though China is our #1 trading partner, that there are more Americans detained in China than anywhere else on Earth. Due to the lies and deceptions by the Chinese Communist Party, we are unsure exactly of how many Americans are even being held today on the mainland in China. But what we do know is that our fellow Americans, including this incredible panel before us today, is on the front line of exposing how many Americans are being held in captivity, including Kai Li, Nelson Wells Jr., and Don Michelle Hunt. Each face unknown health concerns, potential threats of torture, mistreatment at the hands of the CCP. And I want to begin by thanking each of you for taking time to come here today to share your stories and be the face for so many stories that remain unspoken at this time. The threats from the CCP range. We know that it's false imprisonment for trumped-up charges of espionage simply for preaching Christianity in China, to family members who were detained and used as political pawns against the United States. These Americans have unjustly and unfairly found their freedom stolen by the Chinese Communist Party. It's our duty today to bring attention to these very important cases and work hard to ensure that we bring all of our brothers and sisters back home. So thank you each, and Mr. Humphrey, I'd like to begin with you. You are a China expert. You're a former CCP detainee yourself. In fact, in June of this year, 4 citizens from my state, teachers from Iowa, teaching at Cornell, were viciously attacked in rural China, simply for being Westerners. But certainly it appears that the attack may have been propagated by an anti-West feeling stoked by local officials. According to ABC News, these 4 instructors from Cornell were brutally attacked simply by bumping into a 55-year-old Chinese national. There seemed to be an overall hostility towards Westerners throughout the region. So I want to begin. Does the CCP look for opportunities to target, attack, and arrest ordinary citizens while operating in China?
Yeah, what we can say, I think, is that the CCP under Xi Jinping's leadership, in other words, him, has fostered an atmosphere of xenophobia in China during his reign. And we've seen it expressed initially in policies towards the outside world, and we've seen it expressed in constraints and harassment of foreigners in China. But there's an element in the Chinese population which takes these kind of signals as signals to get rough with people. And I mean, there was a prisoner, American prisoner, held in the same cell as Nelson Wells some years ago. He's out now. He's a footballer, and his name's Wendell Brown, up in Detroit. And he was certainly a victim of that type of arrest, where he was working, coaching in China, and he started to get bullied in a bar because he was with a Chinese lady, and some local people started a fight with him, and he got arrested and jailed for brawling. I think he was held for a few years, 2.5 years, something like that. And a skillful Chinese lawyer got him out in the end with a reduced sentence. That's an example of this atmosphere that you're talking about, Commissioner Nunn. Xi Jinping has engendered an atmosphere of hatred of the outside world in China today. Not everyone buys it, but the kind of people who beat up, your 4 guys from Iowa, They were victims of precisely this atmosphere which he has created. He came to power saying, we need to clean up all this foreign trash we've got in China. And that was precisely the time when we saw this wave of people getting arrested and imprisoned in the category of Dawn Hunt, Nelson Wells, and Mark Swedan. They all were taken in that period as that atmosphere was being whipped up by the new Xi Jinping regime. I hope that answers your question.
No, Mr. Humphrey, thank you very much. And let me first say, as somebody who has worked as a counterintelligence officer in Guangzhou, the large swath of Chinese people truly believe in a greater humanity. And it's a salute to those who are trying to push back against this type of brutality coming out of it. But this is clearly a dictate coming from the CCP, trying to identify leverage, in my opinion, against the United States. And their tactic now has become this incarceration of U.S. citizens to use as leverage. And
I agree.
From Hamas or anyone else.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely.
Let me ask this. When the CCP arrests and detains American citizens, what do you believe is the ultimate goal when they take these individuals in, as you know, for brawling years in the Chinese detention facility?
I mean, I think, in a way, they see it like as a warehouse, right? And they're building up inventory in that warehouse to trade off when they need to. In fact, one of my detention center guards, a senior one, once said to me, "We're just a warehouse. We move people in, and at some point in time, we move people out." So that metaphor is very applicable, I think. They're building stock to trade on.
That is frightening. And I think absolutely something we would say in the military, building a stock of blood chits that they get to cash in that happen to be U.S. citizens that they're housing. In your words, and I think is correct, warehousing American citizens for a time that they want to gain leverage over the United States. Can I just briefly, what are their tactics that they're using? You noted instigating a brawl to be able to identify them. Are these intended targets? Are they looking across the board? Is it happenstance? How do they go after what you call these common crimes to be able to draw a noose around an American?
I do think it's partly happenstance and opportunism when an opportunity arises, and it involves those kind of people, those kind of Chinese people, those elements. They take the opportunity. I mean, I know many cases where foreigners, including Americans, have been subjected to this treatment over the last 10, 12, 15 years. It's been quite common.
And Mr. Homer, you brought up a very good point here. This is not unique to just the United States.
I couldn't hear you.
I said this is not unique just to the United States.
Well,
they are targeting other nations as well. Could you share with us who else is being targeted in these wholesale roundup of foreigners?
I think the Japanese are a particularly favorite target because even though there's not such a large number of Japanese in prison in China, they're harassed a lot because there's a lot of hatred towards the Japanese nation in China. But we see it also with Australia. Australia has a substantial number of prisoners in China. And in general towards the Laowai, the Darbis, the foreigners around in China. There are less of them now because in recent years they've been leaving in an exodus. There are far fewer foreigners in China now because of this atmosphere which has been created.
I'd like to talk to the families, particularly those who have loved ones currently in detention there. It's an open question, but Mr. Lee, I'll start with you. Your father was arrested on unspecified so-called espion charges. How are Americans treated when they go through these Chinese courts? You had a front row seat to it. Is it transparent? Is there an appeal process? Does the accused get any kind of defense?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Nunn. Yeah, look, it's certainly not a transparent process. I think that goes without saying. Like I said, my father did not have access to legal representation in the first 6 months when he was being interrogated. The trial was behind closed doors. Members from the consulate tried to attend, but were not able to get in. And, it's because allegedly the trial is about quote-unquote state secrets, so that's a convenient way for them to bar access to the trial. it's certainly not a transparent process. It's a long process. For my father, it was 2 years from initial detention to sentencing. For a lot of others, it's been unfortunately much, much longer. In terms of an appeal process, such a process exists. My father did appeal his sentence. Ultimately, it got denied, as I'm not aware of a single case in which an appeal has been successful.
Mr. Wells, first of all, thank you for your military service and long-rendered sacrifice for our country. You are now fighting another battle to bring your son home. When he was detained by the Chinese, can you speak to or are you aware of the type of environment he was placed in once in the Chinese detention facility, how he was treated, and what updates you have on his well-being?
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. As I stated before, it took us a while to find Nelson, so he was in the detention center quite a long time. And while he was there, he wasn't able to reach out to us. So when we did find out where he was at, and we contacted numerous lawyers, and that didn't work out well, but there was one lawyer that he picked up the case and he said, I will try to assist Nelson. But by the time he got there, Nelson had already been going to trial. And as Mr. Harrison said, it was closed. He didn't have anybody to speak for him, so it had to be through interpretation. But it was already stamped that Nelson was going to be guilty regardless. But one of the things that the lawyer did tell us, he said, while I was there, I was able to do two things. The first thing is that I listened to what the case was about, and he said that it was inconclusive. He said, as far as I'm concerned, Nelson should be free. The second thing that he was able to do is to tell Nelson that your parents are aware that you are in this situation and that they are doing everything they can so that you will not feel that you are all alone and by yourself. That was the only two things that he was able to do. But when Nelson finally talked to us, and you got to remember that all his phone calls are monitored, they're censored. So when he had the opportunity to talk to us, he started telling us the duress that he was under, how he was being treated, how the guards were handling him, and doing things that, to me, is inhumane. So he was crying out, Pops, get me out of here. Get me out of here. I can't take it. So I told him, as we started discussing, they hung up the phone. Later, he was able to give us another call 6 months later. He asked us, was we doing any progress? And he was still in this detention. So he said, I got to get out of here. So I set up an appeal, and the appeal should help me get out. Is there any legal assistance that you could help me with? And I told him that it's hard to tell your child that your hands are tied. So I told him I was not capable, but I will do everything that I could. So that's when he decided I have to, under coerce, and being through what he was going through, he decided to do a plea. And at that point, that's when they accepted his appeal. And then they accepted to put him in a regular prison system and get him out of detention. And then he was able to give us code on telling us how he was being treated. He would reminisce a movie or anything of that nature and say, Pops, remember this movie? It went like this. And that's how we understood what he was going through. Nelson has been attacked because in the situation that he's in, he's the only American and only Black American in the prison where he's at. So he has no communication with anyone to speak English. So everything he does, it has to be within himself, eternal. All the guards are Chinese. all the inmates are Chinese. And so he has been attacked just for who he is, being American, a black American. He has been put in the hospital several times, as well as the fact he's been attacked by guards, which was just recently. So the situation that he's going through, when he communicates this to us, we tell the ACS, and we ask them to do more frequent visits, because from Beijing to where Nelson is, I understand it's quite a distance. So they will only go see him at 3 months, every 3 months. Well, we were requesting that they would go see him at least once a month because of the fact he's out there on his own. And the correspondence that we get to him when we send it through, like Mr. Humphrey said, it's a nanny service. When we give him, our family members writes letters to him and books that we try to send to him, and it is being screened by the guards, and they won't allow him to have it. So that means it'll be at the prison, but he can't receive it because of the fact they feel it's not appropriate. So it takes away from his communication with his family and loved ones. So to answer your question, while he was in the detention center, he tried to explain that he was sleeping on the floor, and as Mr. Lee said, because of the weather, he said, send me some clothes so I can weather the winter, because the windows are open. There's no way to close the windows. So his plea to us has always put an emotional strain on us as well, because we know our child is suffering. And that detention center, for those that go there and they stay there for a long periods of time, that's a stressful situation.
Mr. Wells, you are doing so much for your son, even just by being here today to raise the awareness to the American people. As a father, I compliment you. As a warrior, we thank you. And for your son, Nelson, not only do our hearts go out, there must be action taken on our side to hold the Chinese accountable, and you have our commitment for that. I'm grateful for you being here. Mr. Hunt, thank you for your service first and foremost as a Chicago police officer. You are one of these great heroes from the heartland. You have been on the front line here in the United States protecting our country, and certainly there is a need for public safety, but it is different when a foreign country seeks out Americans to use as political tools going forward. Your sister, Dawn, a woman detained inside China. Speak to us about what the Chinese have put her through while in the detention facility and what information you've been able to get out, because we hear reports here of health concerns, of potential threats of torture, of mistreatment at the hands of guards, particularly of females. I can't imagine how difficult this is for you.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. Yes, my sister conveyed to my father that she was sexually assaulted in the detention facility. I understand what Mr. Wells was saying because his story is the same story that I have. Denial of access to reading materials, only being able to have anything in Chinese, and she doesn't understand it. The cold, laying on the floor, requesting blankets, the food, everything, Mr. Wells, every story that you've heard is correct. Our citizens are being mistreated, abused, and it's coordinated. It's not something that is a one-off. It's not, oh, it happens to this prisoner. It doesn't happen to others. It happens to every prisoner. I understand that we are convened here today so we can give you information. I hope you take this information to heart. And I say this because during the visit with my sister, there was a person who was standing right next to her with the headphone on, listening to everything we said, taking notes. I asked my sister about the sexual assault. She briefly looked up, looked down, and there was a tension there I could see in her eyes, I could feel, and she said no. But I knew she was under duress. I knew that her freedom to tell me the truth had been taken away. Now imagine, not only is your freedom of movement taken, but your freedom to tell the truth, your freedom to speak up, your freedom to cry out, your freedom to ask for help is taken as well. That's what I need this panel to understand. That's what all of our family members are going through, right here, right now.
Mr. Hunt, that is powerful. It is real. Mr. Chairman, I am so grateful for you doing this fact-finding hearing that is both bicameral, that is bipartisan, that has the White House's ear, and it is clear that not only does more need to be done, but we have to recognize the strategic threat here as well as the tactical human suffering that's going on. We've heard, Mr. Humphrey, that this is a coordinated effort by the Chinese Communist Party to build a warehouse of U.S. citizens in detention facilities that these families and so many, many more are going through right now. That there is a intentional coercion of American citizens while in Chinese detention facilities to either plead guilty so that they can speak to their family and have at least some hope of an appeal, or remain in a solitary environment year after year. And challengingly, as you've each highlighted, in any country in the world, we would consider this to be barbaric. But in a country that presents itself as an equal to the United States, to strip another citizen of not only their freedom, but their humanity, this must be called into question, held accountable, and we need to recognize that China not only is playing the long game here, but continues to build an arsenal of Americans to be held in detention at a time and place of their choosing to be able to negotiate against the United States. We should never allow this to happen. I thank the panel for being here. Our hearts are with each of your family.